Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. So we're gonna wrap up what I read in February today, and one of these books is actually one that I finished right at the end of January, but totally forgot to put it in my January wrap up, and it was a book I actually liked, so I want to make sure I talk about that here. So I hope you guys are all having a great reading month in March and you've made a dent in your TBRs. So February was a fairly good reading month for me. I did have a couple of really great reads, which is fantastic because I find if I have a couple of reads in a row that are kind of subpar, it can put me into a slump. So haven't experienced that yet, and something new that I've been trying this year as well is not doing TBRs. I mentioned that on the channel before. So I used to have set monthly TBRs that I would, go through, and I found that kind of being wrapped into a TBR kind of put me into a reading slump as well. So for the first few months of 2022, I've just been kind of winging it. So I read a book and then come down to the shelves or look through my Kindle and pick out something that is just suiting my mood at that moment. So it's been going really great, and February, like I said, was a fairly decent reading month. So getting started with the one book that I finished at the end of January, but I'm sticking it in with the February TBR. It is The Stepchildren by Stephanie Sparks, and this was a really fantastic read. I read Kill the Babysitter last year by Stephanie Sparks, and it was one of my favorite books of the year. So I was super excited to read this one. So this particular book follows a young woman named Jamie, and Jamie had a stepfather when she was growing up that her mother married when she was a little bit older, and dude was totally creepy. And one thing that Stephanie Sparks did really well here was describe this man. His name is Burt Valentine, and you really got a sense of how creepy this guy was. So this is not a spoiler, it's right on the back of the book. So when Jamie and her mom were living with Burt, he actually tried to kill them, and it turned out that he kind of was a serial ruiner of families, I think it's how it's described. And so like I said, no spoilers, it's right on the back of the book. And then when Jamie is a little bit older, she is part of a therapy group, and all of the members of the therapy group are actually the stepchildren of this Burt Valentine. And ultimately he gets put in jail for his crimes, and now the group finds out that he has died in jail, but they're very suspicious of that. Just because of his MO, and they start experiencing some weird things, and they're pretty sure that Burt Valentine is actually still alive. So like I said, that's not a spoiler, right in the synopsis. So we're kind of following this group of stepchildren when they're a little bit older, and they're trying to figure out if Burt Valentine is still alive and is he the person that's terrorizing them. So I really enjoyed this book. It was a great fast-paced adventure, and Stephanie Sparks has a real knack for doing the classic twist ending, and it was fantastic. And so I gave this one 3.5 stars. So I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I did Kill the Babysitter, but still a fantastic read. So I downloaded this one on my Kindle. It's only a couple of bucks. So please go on to Amazon and check out her book. So those two, Kill the Babysitter and The Stepchildren, I would highly recommend picking up those two. So the second book that I read in February is actually by an author who I'd never heard of before and who I met through TikTok. So I tried to get into TikTok, it did not work for my own reasons. I actually had to completely delete the app and get it off my phone. Couldn't do it. I know that is like the most fast-growing form of social media, but it just didn't work for me. I was actually amassing quite a few followers on there, but it just didn't work for me. So maybe I'll tell that story another time. But on TikTok, I had actually done a series of videos at the end of 2021, and they were my best and worst books of the year. so it kind of tied into the video that I did here on YouTube. And I remember he commented on one of my videos that was showing one of my worst reads of the year, and he said, please don't let it be one of my books. So of course I had to go check him out on TikTok, and he has a great account. He is, I believe, a history professor or a history teacher, and he writes books on the side, and he has a great channel. So he's known as the Token Black Guide on TikTok. So if you're on that app, go check him out. And so I checked out a few of his books and decided to pick up Magnolia Lane. And this sounded absolutely fantastic. So this is a piece of Southern Gothic horror, and it centers around a plantation. And back in the 1800s, there was a 1800s, 1700s. I believe it was 1700s maybe. Anyway, there was a plantation owner. Her name was Victoria Blanc, and she ended up dying a painful death back then. So the book kind of starts out following her and what happened to her back when she was a plantation owner. And then the plantation actually stayed in the family, and over the years it was opened up as a museum. But the family didn't want to have anybody, because some of these places are turned into like bed and breakfasts and stuff like that. The family didn't want that, and there's a whole thing surrounding not having people staying there overnight. So in present day, we follow a tour that's going through there, and they end up getting stranded because there's a huge storm and the storm washes out the road. So we have this tour group and a guide that are stuck in this haunted plantation. And I have to say, I was very surprised and highly entertained by the body count and by the horror and the gore that's in this book. So it's because I was kind of figuring, okay, you know, haunted plantation kind of thing, gothic horror, and it very much has those elements, but it also has some great slasher elements as well. So it was kind of a hybrid between the two, and I really enjoyed the story. But above and beyond that, it really goes into kind of history of plantations and things that can be seen as problematic in today's society, like people having weddings at these kinds of places and stuff like that. So it really opens up. It's one of those books that I often say on the channel, like, it opens up questions in my mind about racism and all of that sort of thing, and this book was one of those books. So I really appreciated that some of those things were kind of wound into the fiction, but it wasn't overbearing. It really wasn't. So I really enjoyed this story. I believe I gave this one 4 or 4.5 stars on Goodreads. The only thing that I saw that could be a problem was the formatting of the ebook in a couple of places was a little bit wonky, and the editing could have done with a little bit more of a polish in a couple of places as well. But fantastic story. So if you haven't read any of Donald R. Guillory's writing, or if you haven't followed him on Instagram and TikTok at the Token Black Guide, I highly recommend doing so. He's a fantastic person and super nice, and I really enjoy his writing. So he has a couple of other books out that I am probably going to pick up this year as well. So check out Magnolia Lane. So the next book that I finished in February, and I say it that way because I actually started this book several months ago, but this is a super long book, and the audiobook is super long as well, and that is The Good House by Tananarive Due. And so I believe I did a synopsis of this book back probably when I started it, but just a quick recap. So there is this house that's known as the Good House, and this woman, Angela, is staying there. It's her grandmother's home, and she has her son and her ex-husband, and they're having a 4th of July party, and she can't figure out why, but her son commits suicide in the house. And so she moves out. She's absolutely devastated, of course, as a mother who's lost her child. And later on, like a few years later, she's really consumed with trying to figure out what happened in that house. And there are supernatural forces that are kind of wound into this story of grief. And I have to say, this book it was just so fantastic. Super long, but the story was really engaging. I found it could have been cut down a little bit, but at no point was I bored. I didn't, ever want to put it down and not pick it up again. And there are a lot of things going on in this story, a lot of occult things, a lot of like haunted house kind of aspects, and there's a lot of different storylines, and Angela figures out it's not actually something that's going on just within the house, but in the entire area, like in the whole town of Sacagawea. And if you're going to pick up this book, I highly recommend getting the audiobook. The narrator of this audiobook did a fantastic job, and I know some people like to put their books on like 1.5 or 2 times speed to kind of speed read it, and I didn't do that at all. I left it on 1 time speed because her voice was just so soothing. And I learned, I don't want to say what because I don't want to give anything away, but I learned stuff about other cultures in this book that I didn't know about, and so this is another one that kind of sent me on a little bit of a quest to fill out my own knowledge, and just fantastic. This book is heavily rated 5 stars, heavily, and this was definitely shaping up to be a 5-star read for me until the end. I despised the ending of this book. I hated it. I hated the ending, and at first I was so angry because I was like, oh my god, I sat through like a 23-hour audiobook just to be pissed off by the ending, of course, and you can't do anything about it, but just my whole journey with it during the whole way, it was worth still giving it 4 stars. Fantastic book, and of course a lot of people obviously did enjoy the ending because they gave it 5-star ratings. So highly recommend picking this one up for yourself, and if you do, or if you have and you were pissed off by that ending, let me know. Reach out to me on Instagram and we can vent about it a little bit. But fantastic book. The audiobook is spectacular, so if you haven't read it yet, please pick up the audiobook if you can. It's fantastic. So really happy that I finally finished The Good House, because I felt like everyone here on YouTube had read it except for me, and I definitely wasn't disappointed. And the next book that I tried to read this month was The Monarchs by Cass Morgan and Danielle Page. And this was the sequel to The Ravens, which was one of my favorite reads of 2021. Gave it a full 5 stars. It was one of the very first books that I read way back in January of 2021. I pre-ordered it. I was so excited to read it. And the first book was absolutely fabulous, but unfortunately the sequel did not live up to expectations, and I ended up DNFing this book and being very frustrated. So one of the things that I really liked about the first book, so if you haven't read this series, basically it's about a sorority, like a college sorority, who are actually a secret coven of witches. And so the girls get recruited, and it had this really fantastic like tarot aspect to it, and you could be like one of the elements in the tarot, and they had a really great magic system behind it. They had a really great story about how they recruit the girls, and it was fast-paced and it was page-turning, and once I got to the end of the book, it was just, I couldn't put it down. I ended up staying up late to finish it, and it had a great twist ending. It was a fantastic adventure, and one of the things that I said when I read it that I liked was that even though it's a YA book, it didn't have a huge aspect that was based on the romance going on. There, of course, because it's a YA, there was some romance, but the main storyline revolved around the girls in the coven and, you know, their magic and developing their magic and the witchery and all of that sort of thing. So I could kind of overlook the romance part of it and just concentrate on the main plot. But with the second book, unfortunately, I read the first like 20 to 25% of the second book, and the majority of it was the 2 main characters whining about their boyfriends, or their lack of boyfriends, or their exes, or whatever you want to say, right? So if I'm 25% into the book and there's very little to do with the emphasis on the magic system and the girls and their powers and the adventure and, you know, these people that want to kill them and all of that kind of stuff, I had to put it down. I'm like, this is classic YA, here, just whiny teenagers or early 20s complaining about their boyfriends, and I was just done with it. So really super disappointed with that, because I enjoyed the first book so much, but just the whole emphasis changed in the second book. So unfortunately I had to put it down. I'm convinced that this year I'm not going to force myself to stick with books if I'm not enjoying them, because that's what's going to put you in a reading slump as well, just like I was talking about at the beginning of the video with some other aspects that put you in a reading slump. Really trying to avoid that this year. So I was like, I'm too frustrated, putting it down, and I'm going to pick up something else. So the something else that I picked up was The Chalkman by C.J. Tudor, and I read The Burning Girls last year by C.J. Tudor, and it was one of my favorite reads of 2021. So I was super excited to pick up The Chalkman. And this book is a little bit hard to describe. It is very hard to describe. So it's about a group of kids who, they used to communicate with each other through Chalkman drawings, like on the pavement and stuff, but then over time they started to get Chalkman drawings that weren't from them, and then they ended up discovering a body. And then so fast forward years later, and one of these kids has now gone back to his hometown, you know, the whole trope, and he's trying to figure out what was going on back then and who the murderer was and everything. And it says here, none of us ever agreed on the exact beginning. Was it when we started drawing the chalk figures, or when they started to appear on their own? Was it the terrible accident, or when we found the first body? So the synopsis of this book is really great, and you think it's going to be like a really super fast-paced story. And first of all, this was more of a coming-to-age story than I expected it would be. There was a lot of emphasis on coming to age and secondary storylines and family and all of that sort of thing. So that was, like, for me, I enjoy coming of age stories, but if it's going to be heavily emphasized on that aspect, I would think it would be part of the synopsis more so than it was, and it wasn't. So if you don't like coming of age stories, you're not going to like this book. So it was heavily influenced by that. And then the other thing about this book is that when you're dealing with like thrillers and that sort of thing, and this is something that came up in a book I actually just recently read as well, you have to keep the pace going really quickly. That's what a thriller is supposed to be. And it's supposed to be a page turner. You're supposed to be enthralled in the main storyline. But this was bogged down by so much bullshit that it had like long sections of the book where it was like, oh my god, like, can we just get back to the main story sort of thing. And then there was one section in here that it was essay of a minor, and I had to think about it, and I was like, part of me really didn't appreciate that aspect because it didn't do anything for the story, really. So, but I'm kind of on the fence about that aspect, but just be warned, there is essay of a minor in this book. So I think I gave this book 2 stars. I think it was 2 or 2.5 stars. So the good thing is that C.J. Tudor's writing has greatly, vastly improved since she put out this book. I don't know if she noticed it, or maybe it was, she's got a fantastic editor, but The Burning Girls was a story that she stuck to the main storyline, and even though it had lots of different avenues that were kind of wound into the same story, she really stuck to that story. And the synopsis described it very well. It was a page turner. It really was a thriller. Hardly blinked the whole time I read it. So C.J. Tudor's writing has vastly improved since she's written this one. I believe this book came out in 2018. So, you know, I mean, I wouldn't say this is a terrible book. If you like coming of age stories, maybe give it a go. But it is bogged down by, you know, tons of secondary storylines. So that was unfortunate with this one, but if it had stuck to the main plot, I think it would have done a lot better. And then the last book that I read in February was The Haunting of Ashburn House by Darcy Coates. And this is my 3rd read from Darcy Coates, and if you've read her stories before, you know they always center around haunted houses, people who are down on their luck and they all of a sudden have inherited this mansion, this abandoned mansion that's haunted. It's very much the same sort of creepy, cozy haunted house stories is what she very much concentrates on. And the first 2 books that I read by her, they were okay. They were just okay for me. I think they were like 3-star reads. Wasn't anything over the top, wasn't bad. You know, they were just creepy, cozy reads, nice things to sit down on a rainy Sunday afternoon. But Ashburn House, I found, was really, really, really good. This was the haunted house book that I've been waiting to find. I think this is probably, and if you've read a lot of Darcy Coates, let me know if you agree, but I think this one is probably her best book that she's written. It's about this girl, like I said, so she has a great aunt, I believe, who has this house, Ashburn House, and she is the sole heir. So she is down on her luck. She literally has 20 bucks in her pocket. It's just enough money to pay for the cab, and she has no vehicle. It's just her and her cat. And they move into this house, and you start getting, you know, those classic haunted tropes. But her great aunt was very well known in town, and she finds out that there was a mass murder that happened to some of her ancestors in the home. And I loved the haunted house aspect of this. I loved the isolation and, you know, the small town with secrets and all of those tropes. It was great. But this story was like haunted house / thriller. Like the way it was written, like I was so invested in this story and her great aunt and what she's seeing outside of the house and the whole story behind it. And I love murder house stories. Amityville, love it. Love murder house stories. And this book, I saw it all the way to the end. I finished it, I think, in 2 days. It was fantastic. This was the haunted house story I've been waiting to read. I gave it a full 5 stars, and it was a great way to close out the month. So let me know if you're a Darcy Coates fan and if you've read this one or if you haven't. And I would highly recommend, if you're a haunted house fanatic like I am, I would highly recommend picking this one up. This was a great haunted house story. So there you guys go. That's everything that I read in February. Let me know down below in the comments if you guys have read any of these books. Did you like them? Did you not like them? Leave me a comment, because you know I love chatting with you guys, and make sure you give me a thumbs up on this video and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. But until next time, stay spooky, everybody. Bye.